This is Real Talk with real leaders about real leadership situations. I'm happy to be on here today with Paul Swan, a longtime friend and colleague who has had significant experience in the area of organizational development and learning and design, instructional design. Paul, how you doing today?
Doing all right. It's a good day.
You're coming to us from Park City, Utah, right?
Yep.
Which is one of your homes now, and the other home is in Mexico. So tell us a little bit about how you divide your time between Park City and Mexico and why you do that.
Right now, I spend the winters in Mexico, go down there about the 1st of November and stay down until about the 1st of June. And the short answer is, when I'm cold in Utah during the winter, and I do like to ski, but occasionally the thought comes to mind, I'm cold and I don't have to do this anymore. So I don't.
You have the option of going to warm weather. Now, Paul, let's talk for a minute about your professional experience. I think I first met you probably, 30 years ago. And I know that you have done an extensive amount of work where you help organizations put in place learning initiatives, learning strategies, instructional design. I know you worked with aerospace, you worked with a variety of different industries. Can you just share with us a little bit of your background professionally and how you've gotten to where you are today?
Well, coming out of grad school, I was hired immediately by Daryl Sink and Associates and went from Oregon, where I did my Ph.D. work, down to Silicon Valley. And within the first week, we had clients. Well, within the first week there, I'd flown out to Armonk, New York, done some work with a client there. And Apple was another one of our clients. I was just thrown in the middle of the fire, in the middle of whatever analogy you want to use. I was in the middle of it. I joke that I got 10 years worth of experience in my first year working there. We had a lot of things going.
Yeah.
And working with Daryl Sink, I learned from the best. And he has a talent of putting together ad hoc teams for each of the projects. So on one of the projects I had, a team building project, I worked with Tiagi. Another one, I worked with Harold Stolovich. It was just like, I didn't know it then, but I was in the middle of, the stars, the walk of fame of instructional design and performance technology. I learned a little bit in graduate school. I learned a lot by doing this with the best people. And one of the things that I noticed, especially as I ran projects on my own and became lead designer on a lot of projects, is as we got into organizations, well, I'll give you an example. There's this project I had in Chicago. Was a software development company, and they were growing by, they said 10% a month, which is just unreal, crazy. It was a crazy time at that place. And they wanted me to do some what they called accounting training. They wanted to teach their managers to do some basic accounting tasks so that they could get a hold on their finances, on their expenses and their budgets and so on. And so as I did the content analysis for that, it was easy to discover that organization didn't even have any policies and procedures in place. So here I am, this young guy with hardly any experience. I'm creating policies and procedures for, at that time, it was a medium-large company that was becoming larger by the minute. And I'm dealing with the executive team in making these recommendations. And I would have to say, hey, I can do this training, but I need the basis upon which you want the training to be done. I need to know what your strategy is. I need to know what your goals are. I need to know what is important to this organization. And so here I am doing much more than training. I'm changing the organization in a lot of different ways. And I saw that same pattern happening over and over again. Even, we could be hired to just do a simple computer-based training program and find that there's no such thing as a simple computer-based training program. And I'm not talking about the programming, I'm talking about the relationship to the organization and the organization's goals.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. We've been down that road too, where certain learning initiatives or objectives they have often do require or present the opportunity to change policy. To, management at certain levels within an organization are then required to make some decisions, right, to drive a stake in the ground as to how they're going to operate. That's for sure. So I want to get back to your time in Mexico, because I know that you do something down there that I think is interesting. We're talking today about learning strategy, strategic learning. You're an expert when it comes to learning and helping organizations create successful learning initiatives. But you do something down there in Mexico that I think is connected. It's completely separate from your professional life, but I think that there's a connection there. So can you take a minute and talk to us about, I don't know if you want to call it a hobby, but your interest that and I know you probably don't have to just do it in Mexico, but you do spend a lot of time in Mexico doing it. Tell us about that, the sailing, the laser racing that you do.
Well, through sheer accident, and actually it started in Park City. I decided that I had some interest in sailing, so there was a boat called a laser, and a laser is not much bigger than a stand-up paddleboard. It's 14 feet long. It's one person. It is an Olympic class, so if we have the Olympics here in the next year or so, if they're ever able to do that, you'll see the laser racing. They have a men's division and a women's division. It's very athletic. It's a lot of exercise. You use your body to manipulate the boat. Anyway, I bought a boat and I needed a sail for it. The sail that came with it, I think the boat was like a 1974 model, but this is a one design class. So the boats made in 1974 are exactly the same as the boats in 2020. And so I needed a sail. I found a cheap one online and I ordered it. And the guy that ran the company said, he called me up directly and he says, "Hey, I'm up in Park City. Did you know that we have a fleet of a fleet of lasers that race every Tuesday nights?" And I said, "No, I had no idea. In fact, I didn't even know that they raced." So I came up to Park City and checked out the races. And I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. I think I'd like to try that. So I got the sail and I raced and I was consistently last. I knew absolutely nothing about it, but I wanted to know more. So I started trying to get some videos and stuff and learn some more about it and kind of teach myself and have some of the guys at Park City teach me. And oh, by the way, I've got races tonight here in Park City
Oh,
that I'm going to do. But anyway, so we bought this house down in Mexico. I went down to Mexico, and in the laser magazine that came out quarterly, there was an ad for this little teeny school called the International Sailing Academy that, guess what? They concentrated exclusively on laser training, training Olympic sailors, training what they call masters sailors, older sailors that have their own divisions. And so I went down, and it was so small. There's an Olympic coach that I was the only customer for a few weeks, so I got like private lessons. And so I started learning more and getting more success. And anyway, to make a long story short, over the years, I've been taught their way, and I'm now a coach down there. And over the years, they've picked my brain and said, "Hey, what is it that you do? We think that maybe you could help us in designing our coaching." So something, I guess you could say, making lemonade out of lemons. This past spring, when everybody, all the customers that fly in from all over the world into Mexico to do their training canceled, we had to scramble to come up with something. So they decided to do some online video and other types of training. I guess we'll get into that later today.
yeah.
But so in March and April and May, I'd go out sailing and they'd video me, or the Olympic coach would take my boat and sail until his back hurt too much, and then they'd switch out with me. Made all kinds of video and then launched some online video courses here that are doing quite well. They launched about the 1st of June, and it's really taken the laser sailing by storm. Anyway, it's simply incorporating the principles that work, the principles of effective instruction and changing behavior and changing performance and changing accomplishment. Those same principles work for sailing as well as they work for businesses. When my kids were young, I used them in coaching Little League Baseball and had a lot of good success with that as well. So these principles really do work, and they're universal in their application.
That's awesome. And we want to talk a little bit about those principles here in a minute. So you took what you know professionally about learning and change and applied it to the laser sailing. And I don't know if you have an answer for this, but is there any way that your hobby or your interest in laser sailing has enhanced your work professionally? Is there anything that's you've been able to bring over from the laser sailing into your instructional design and learning strategy professional projects?
Well, it's certainly made me think more about transfer of training from, let's call it the classroom, and there really isn't a classroom in this case, but the transfer from whatever instruction you get to them actually being able to do it out on the water. And that's analogous to whatever your training intervention is, or whatever your performance or learning intervention is, or initiative is. At some point, the rubber's got to meet the road. You've got to take that learning and turn it into action. And more importantly, you take that action and turn it into performance. And even more important than that, you take that performance and you turn it into accomplishment. That's what we're after. Whether it's accomplishment of the organization or accomplishment of the individuals within that organization to allow that organization to achieve the accomplishments that it's after. That's what it's all about. So it's real easy in laser sailing to have a coach say, no, you need to do this, you need to do that, go out and do it. And then they go out on the water and they can't do it. You've got all of the things going on. This last year, we actually had a number of whales that got close to us. I bring that up because there are a lot of distractions that come up when people are trying to try out new learning and new performance. And you may think that the learning has occurred, but there's really no payoff until they can actually do it. And so I've seen the importance of that, and the importance of having feedback loops that the learner can have, because out on the water, these are one-person boats, so you can't be in the boat with them. And you can't be following them around every single second. So they've got to be able to give feedback to themselves when they do a tack, or they're trying to generate speed upwind or downwind or something like that. So I think, if anything, it's reinforced key components and key principles that you just can't skip. If you skip them, you don't get that payoff. So yeah, it just says that there are no shortcuts. You've got to do it and do it right.
I like that. You mentioned learning to action, action to performance, performance to achievement or results, and feedback loops along the way. I think the idea that, in the laser sailing you talked about, it's one person out there, right? Which could be analogous to lots of work situations where the learner is on their own too, that hopefully what they've learned they can apply and use in the moment and they maybe by themselves. The trainer, the coach, the facilitator isn't there to support them. There's no training wheels, right? So they need to get it right. That's good. I like that. So Paul, I'm going to give you 3 phrases, 3 terms. Let's just work on these terms to see, we don't have a written script here, but I want to see if we can explore the difference between these 3 terms, if there are any. Okay, so I hear a lot of my work, and you probably do too. If we have a learning objective, what's the learning strategy? What's the strategy we're going to use to accomplish this objective? So learning strategy is one term. Another term that I hear a lot is learning as a strategic initiative for an organization, right? So they may have a strategic initiative around increasing market share, but some, not a lot, but some organizations actually have a strategic initiative around learning. That's another term. And then the third term is simply strategic learning, that you're learning strategically. So can you just help me out, kind of explore? I know this is off the top of your head. How would you, what comes to mind? Let's take the first one of learning strategy. What comes to mind there? What does that mean to you?
Let's flip those. Let's
Okay.
start with the third one.
All
Okay.
right. Yeah, let's do that.
And that, if I recall, was strategic learning. And first
Yes.
of all, I want to say I'm not trying in any way to give the official definition. I'm not trying to recall anything I've memorized. I really, unfortunately, in our business, there are people that spend more time arguing about the difference in definitions
Yeah.
than actually going out and making a change in performance and achievement. So I don't want to do that. I just want to have some fun with these. And so maybe it's word association, but let's start with the third one, which is strategic learning. I'll start with strategic. As soon as I hear the word strategic, I've got to say, okay, what's the context? You can't have strategic or strategy unless you're in the context, in my thinking, of an organization that wants to do something different or achieve something different than they're achieving right now. I've never yet run into an organization that says, we are pleased as punched at what we're doing now, and we just want to keep doing that. I suppose that's a recipe for disaster and extinction.
Obsolescence. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as soon as I hear the word strategic, that I'm in a context where an organization wants to become better in some way, and that there's a vision, that there is a mission, that there are high-level goals that give it direction, and that the strategy or the methods to achieve those are the strategies or plans that they hope will achieve those. So strategic, I think, puts it in that context of a larger organization that has a direction towards improvement. Then when I get to learning, I have a little bit of aversion to that, because over my career, I always run into people that say, well, we want our employees to know this, or we want our employees to appreciate this. And as soon as I hear that, red flags go up, because knowing is, well, let me give you a story. Well, I'll give you two stories. When I was a kid, there was this song that we learned, and you probably learned it too, that says, teach me all that I must know. When I was about 8 years old, they changed the lyrics to teach me all that I must do. I thought about that for a while. And then when I get into this business, I go, aha, now I know the difference. Now I know why that's so important. I was doing a project for IBM. They wanted us to teach a lot of their engineers this process for changing performance and improving performance. We put together a custom course for them. And we'd gone through an alpha, and we were doing a beta. I was presenting the beta in Dallas, at their facility in Dallas. And they had their director of human resource development was down there, but for some reason he couldn't attend. So he had an MBA intern that had been working with him for the last 3 months, and he sent that intern to observe me. And really what they wanted to do is just review it one more time, identify any changes that needed to take place, make those changes, and then they're ready for the launch. So at one point I said something to the effect, IBM really doesn't care what its employees know. They only care what they're able to do with that. And during the break, that intern came up to me and said, Paul, you got to change that. You got to drop that. IBM really does care what its employees know, and you can't say that. You need to take that out. And I didn't agree, but I kept my mouth shut. So at the end of the day, we're doing a debriefing with the director there. And the first thing out of that intern's mouth was, do you know what Paul said? Paul said that IBM really doesn't care what its employees know, only cares about what they do with it. And this director comes out from behind his desk, and really, this has never happened to me. He puts his finger in my chest and he goes, Paul, and at this point I'm thinking, oh man, I got to find another job.
You're in trouble.
I've blown this contract. He puts his finger in my chest and he goes, Paul, don't you dare take that out of the course. That's exactly why we hired you guys. We have so much problem with all of our learning initiatives just fizzling out because we think we're communicating knowledge, but we get no payoff. And the decision makers at the executive level are really getting suspicious about the amounts of money being budgeted to these initiatives. When I think about learning, I think, okay, yeah, learning is a prerequisite. It's important. But once again, what we're after is learning to change behavior, changing behavior to create a new performance or an improved performance, and an improved performance that leads to accomplishment and achievement. That's what we're really after. So when I think about, okay, strategic learning, I'm thinking about learning that has the end goal of achieving some performance and achievement and accomplishment that helps move the organization towards those things that are most important to the mission of the organization.
Yeah, that's great. Learning that creates change, desired change, that actually then results in the outcomes that you're looking towards. Love that. Those are great stories too. I like those examples. And that syndrome, or whatever you want to call it, we experience that too at Learning Point. You know, I think our focus is on leadership. So you've dealt in maybe a broader array of learning initiatives or objectives than we do. But it's interesting because you take a leader or a management team, and if they recognize a concept, even if they're familiar with a term, right, collaboration or any kind of a buzzword, it's easy for individuals to assume that they know that concept, they know that management principle, they know that leadership method, when really all they do is they're just recognizing the term. They haven't created a habit yet. They haven't created that practice yet of where they're actually implementing it and implementing it in unison with each other, you know, in a way that actually makes a difference within their organization. When I heard you describing that and talking about the IBM example, it reminded me of that. You know, we run into that a lot. Well, I know that. Yeah, we know that. I don't know if we need that. We already know that. But are you doing it? And are you doing it together? So are there some thoughts or some principles that you have, some best practices or methods that you've used to help get from the quote knowing into the doing and verifying and checking? I mean, what comes to mind there that you found to be, what organizations do that effectively, or have you seen where that works?
Well, let's go back to your second term and what was it?
The learning strategy behind an objective or some sort of initiative. So for example, you mentioned the organization that wanted to teach their managers basic accounting, right? If that's the objective, what would be the learning strategy behind that?
Yeah. Well, going back to definitions again, a lot of people think that learning strategies are the media.
Right.
My learning strategy is we're going to do online courses for everybody, or we're going to do blended learning, or we're going to do whatever the fad is this year. They think that's the learning strategy.
Live virtual workshops.
Yes.
Yeah.
And granted, yes, that is part of the strategy, I guess you could say, but it's generally not even the most important. Once again, let me tell it in story form. Most of the times I get contacted, a potential client will say, we need a training video on this, or we need an online course for that. And we always have to help them take a step back and say, okay, yeah, we can do that, but what's the problem? And once we understand that performance gap of, what is happening now and what they hope to have happen, then we can begin to create some true learning strategies. Now, those strategies, the initial part can be that delivery of information to get them to that point where they know it. But now, and most organizations do not think of this, they do not think of sustaining that and turning it into new habits. New habits aren't created in one day, they aren't created in 1 week, and despite folklore, they aren't created in 21 days. They are created in an environment that supports that new performance and behavior. And so a strategy and a method of making all that happen has to include something that takes place after the delivery of the information, or what people would most often call the training. They pay a lot of money for that training intervention, but then nothing happens afterwards. So what are some strategies and techniques that work afterwards? Well, one is to look at all the tools that we have to change performance and to reinforce performance and to extinguish the kind of bad performance we don't want. So some of those tools can include, one of the simplest is employee selection. Rather than hiring somebody that doesn't have that skill, now you know what it is that you want and what you need. Go out and hire somebody that has that skill. Right. That's cheaper than training.
Right.
Another intervention is to use your incentive systems to reward that or to penalize not doing that. Another one simply is to bake it into your assessment. And I think an important part when we're talking about learning strategies and strategic learning and all of this, I think an important part that is missing is assessment. And I'm not talking about grades by any means, and I'm not talking about multiple choice tests at the end of training. I'm talking about a way that all the parties involved can assess whether or not that new performance is taking place and whether or not that new performance is actually impacting the key performance indicators of the organization that should be evidence that they are moving towards those overall goals and mission that we talked about earlier. So assessment is an important way to do that. And going back to my sailing experience, I love checklists. And I think the simplest, it's a low tech, it can be high tech too, but a low tech way to give somebody the tools that they need so that they can assess themselves is to give them a checklist that is based upon model performance, that details the key components. And if the checklist is crystal clear, they can say, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I didn't do that. Okay, next time I do that, I'm going to use what we call deliberate practice, and I'm going to zero in on that step. I may even repeat that step 50 times or 100 times, and then put it in the context and concentrate on that step. It's like Michael Jordan or Kobe doing making 100 free throws at the end of a practice, saying, okay, I had a problem at the end of the game last time. I was so tired I couldn't make my free throw shots. I know I need to make them. I know my knees need to bend. I noticed in that video they didn't bend. Now I'm going to practice concentrating on my knees and making those shots. Well, we can do the same thing in virtually any human performance. Break it down into smaller pieces. That checklist can also be used by the next level supervisor to hold them accountable for. And then the next level of management can use that to say, okay, are you holding your direct reports responsible for meeting that standard? And that can roll all the way up through the organization. Now you've created an environment for sustaining the kind of behavior that you thought you were buying when you got the training. And I've done a lot of projects that left that out. We've recommended it, but they go, oh no, we don't have any budget left for that. So they throw the training up against the wall and hope something sticks, and it doesn't. It doesn't change.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned a few things in there that I think are really, really important. And if I'm understanding them correctly, you said deliberate practice. So the checklist or tools like that would help the learner zero in on that one thing that they need or want to get even better at, right? It could be item 3 on the checklist. And then the deliberate practice is the structured, focused, intentional, repetitive practice of that one skill, that one technique, that one method. Um, that's what you meant by deliberate practice, I assume, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, I don't want to discount the importance of the entire task. There, very few people are responsible for doing simple tasks.
Yeah.
Virtually all human tasks are complicated in many ways. But if you can zero in on that problematic area and then build that into the longer sequence, you're more likely to get an overall sequence that works. And that's what we're after, is the overall sequence. But sometimes there are just some things that are going on in there that either they don't have the tools to diagnose, or they don't recognize, well, the same thing, they don't recognize that they're doing it wrong, that they missed a step or missed a critical attribute of what it is that they're trying to do. So what is it? Our mothers used to tell us, practice makes perfect, or piano teachers. That's a bald-faced lie. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice only makes permanent.
Right.
And if you don't provide a feedback loop and some way to give feedback to a performance, all you're going to get is a new habit that is permanent, that may or may not be achieving what you want it to achieve. So if you want people to change and do something different, you've got to provide some way to provide feedback. Now, optimum, going back to our sailing example, is to have a coach in the coach boat in a motorized, rigid inflatable boat, rib we call them, following that sailor, saying, do this, do that, no, don't do that, do this. And really giving that feedback instantaneously. But that's not always possible, just like a manager can't follow somebody around on every shift. So if you can provide a tool, job aid, a reference, a just-in-time training, whatever's necessary to help provide a feedback loop, that increases the chances that you're going to get something you like.
Excellent. You mentioned also the role of the next level supervisor, the person that the learner reports to, their boss. That if that person has a checklist also and is kind of watching or observing, monitoring, any good coach, right, is going to watch the effort of the person that's performing, whether it be an athlete or a worker or whatever. Talk to me about what you have found to be an effective role for the manager of the learner. Because I agree with you completely. We push that all the time, is that one of the best coaches is going to be the manager of the learner, whoever that learner is. So what have you seen with regard to that role?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said coach. If the manager is being held accountable for certain performances and accomplishments, then they've got a stake in having their employees perform in a certain way. And if they've got that stake and they've got skin in the game, now instead of them playing the role of penalizing the person that doesn't perform, penalizing probably isn't going to change that performance. Firing the person is not going to get you somebody in there immediately that's going to get their performance.
Yeah.
So probably the least painful, although it's still painful, probably the cheapest, although it's still expensive, is to have a manager that's got that skin in the game that says, you know what, for my own welfare, it's better for me if I help you to perform. And now I've got this tool that I can use when I look over your shoulder to say, hey, you've done great on the first 5 steps. Let's work on number 6 here. And to come up with a way to help with that. Now they played the role of diagnostics, and now they can also play the role of providing examples, of coaching, of motivation, of feedback, whatever's necessary to help get that performance up. I think that probably coach is the best word to describe it. A good manager is a good coach. A good manager is helping their team to perform. An even better manager is helping at least a few members of that team to take that manager's place. What do they call it? The not sustainment. It's the
Succession plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's good. It reminded me recently, a while ago, it's been about 8 months or 9 months ago, I was asked to coach a senior level director of finance in an organization who needed to improve the people skills, the collaboration aspect of the job. And I remember talking with this person's manager, the general manager of this organization, and saying, well, here are some things that you might want to consider doing. Here's the kind of conversations that you may want to have with your finance director. And he said, no, you know what? No, I've never been good at coaching. I'm not good at that. That's why I hired you. And I said, okay, well, if we're going to continue, then I want to coach your director, but I also want to coach you, because you can coach that person in ways that I will never be able to, right? That there's this manager had skin in the game. I don't have skin in the game. There's things I can do to help that situation, but I think you've really hit on something where you recognize the role of the person that the learner reports to, the role and the stake that they have, the investment that they have in that person's success, not just their learning, as you mentioned, but their actual successful performance in their job, which is critical. Have you worked with organizations that do that really well? Can you think of any organizations that do that well, where the manager is playing that role of coach effectively?
I think probably the best one I've seen recently was USAA. We did some work for their telephone representatives, the people that take new memberships, people that take claims and so on. And we were able to roll up that standard of performance probably about 4 levels through the organization. And at the highest level, they were assessing and did a very, very rigorous study to determine how much money was saved and how much money was made by changing the performance of these people that we worked with. So there was accountability, but there was also standards of performance all the way through it. And the key thing that rolled through that was this standard that we had set. And that standard was the checklist. And that standard was used by what they called their quality control. It was used by direct supervisors, first line supervisors. It was used by their managers. It was used by compliance, especially compliance. We baked compliance into that standard. And so everybody was speaking the same language. A lot of consultants talk about alignment. A lot of management books talk about alignment, but there are few organizations that are really, really interested in putting it into action. But USAA in that case really did a good job of putting it into action and having it flow through those different levels and have people speaking the same language. And that same language was based upon that standard of performance.
That's good. And that leads to that third, or I guess the first, whatever. In fact, the third term and the first term may be very closely related, which is learning as a strategic initiative was that one that we haven't really talked about yet, but we've talked about certain components of it. I think that what you just described is an organization that probably in some way had a strategic initiative or goal around learning. Financial management might be part of their strategy, resource allocation might be part of their strategy, increasing market share might be part of their strategy, whatever it might be, but also learning. Peter Senge talked about in the fifth discipline, the learning organization. I like to use this little analogy of if you take a dirty guppy out of the pond and clean them up, maybe you send them to a Paul Swan workshop, which is completely strategically sound in terms of the learning experience that they have, but then you throw them back in the pond and nothing's changed in the pond, and they're going to struggle, right, to succeed, to perform. And so when I think of an organization that has learning as a strategic initiative, a priority, then they're focused also on changing the pond, not just changing the guppy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so what thoughts do you have around that? Have you seen that? Are there organizations that you work with, maybe USAA is one of them, where it's an intentional objective of theirs to create a learning organization?
I can probably start by giving you some non-examples. They're easiest and they're the most prevalent.
Okay.
I've worked with a number of organizations that say that they want to be learning organizations and have learning initiatives. And the only evidence that they have learning initiatives is that they budget 20% more to their training department. And that really doesn't work. I think on the other end of the spectrum, the organizations that I think really truly that have learning initiatives that are serious about that, they're also serious about evaluation and assessment. And I'm talking about the highest levels. I think the best analogy is project management. If you know the project management body of knowledge and all the standard steps and components of project management, one of those at the end is lessons learned. And I think a company or an organization that truly is interested in being a learning organization or has a learning initiative, they are very interested in gathering data and assessing at various times, either after key events or key happenings in their history, or maybe even on a regular basis, gathering together that data through assessment and extracting out the lessons learned and fast forwarding those lessons learned into the next initiatives and the next actions and goals and so on. I've seen that very, very, very few times.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of incentives, especially at the higher level, that provide incentives for not looking at the long term, provide incentives for not making those lessons known, provide incentives for hiding those lessons, because sometimes those lessons are based upon failures. But truly, an organization that wants to have learning strategies, initiatives, and so on, all working together to achieve that, they're going to have that assessment and tell the truth and use that to shape what they're doing in the future.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I think I can imagine that has a lot more to do with leadership in those organizations than it does with classroom, right? You could do all of what you just described without ever having a class on anything, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, you might have classes.
Yeah.
Classes are good. Classes, training, events are good. But what you're describing is not about the classroom. It's not about the learning event. It's about the processes within that organization, which has a lot to do with the leadership, being willing to look at, truthfully, the experience that we just went through and learn from it, even the failures, or especially the failures. Excellent. Good. Well, Paul, we have just a few more minutes. Anything else you want to share with us about, you had talked earlier about sustainment, the concept of sustainment. If a learner an employee has put forth the effort, the organization's invested the time to help that person go from learning to action, action to performance, performance to change on the job, and then desired results, and that's all an effort, a focused effort, then where does this sustainment idea come into play? What do you have to say about that part of it?
Well, that taps into your pond analogy. That's where you go to work in the pond.
Okay.
You create a new environment that fosters and sustains that new learning, that new behavior that you're hoping to achieve. You try to remove all the things that are going to extinguish that new behavior. Some of those things that extinguish the old behavior could be tools. You may have to change out tools or machinery or maintenance schedules. You may have to isolate some employees that refuse to change. I've heard it more than once. Say, hey, don't listen to those new guys. We've done it this way for 30 years. You do it our way. My first job was with the Internal Revenue Service, straight out of high school. And I was an eager beaver at that point. Well, and I was when I left too, but they sat me down within the first couple of weeks and said, we don't do that here. You do it this way.
You work at our pace and our methods. Okay, that's good. No, I get that. Paul, we got like a couple minutes left here. So let me ask you this. Are you retired at this point? Are you still involved doing projects, working with organizations, consulting with them? If someone wanted to get a hold of you, are you accessible? And if so, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I try to pretend like I'm retired, but I do take on projects, especially projects that interest me and projects that don't interfere with my sailing. But they've got laser sailing just about everywhere in the world. So yes, I do take on projects. Got a project with Boeing right now that I'm trying to finish up. So yeah, especially projects that are interesting and projects that are interested or clients that are interested in with really getting a solution, just not going through the motions of it. The easiest way to contact me is probably through my email, and that's pretty easy to remember, paul.swan.phd@gmail.com. Otherwise, they can track you down and you can track me down. But it's really changed our business. Some of the major events over the last 2 decades, 9/11 and the crash of our recession, and now COVID, people are more than happy to have me work from wherever I am. So for many years, my internet connection in Mexico was much, much better than my internet connection in Utah.
Oh, wow.
So things have worked out quite nicely that way. So a lot of ways to get involved these days and still be able to not have to travel so much. And that's been a blessing. So yeah, I'm interested in interesting projects. So if you got something, give me a call.
Yeah, that's great. paul.swan.phd@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll put that up along with this video on our website as well. So Paul, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the work that you do and our relationship. And we'll have to do this again sometime soon, okay?
Sounds good.
Be safe out there on the waters, okay? All right, take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye now.